All right, well, we're live. Welcome, everyone, whoever happens to be here. Welcome to another reading of Revenge in Three. Three Muslim authors, three genres, three retellings of the Count of Monte Cristo, brought to you by Fresh Pulp Press. We have with us today Laurie Silvers, Jabril Stevenson, and myself, the three authors in the book. So if you all would like to introduce yourselves, that would be awesome.
I'm Laurie Silvers, and I write now that I'm in my retirement from teaching Islamic studies. I'm writing mysteries and thrillers, sometimes set in medieval Muslim lands, sometimes set in contemporary Toronto.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Jabril Stevenson. I write mostly westerns, mostly Muslim westerns, and then a lot of short fiction in various genres. Um, Pleased to be here.
I am Jay Austin Yoshino. I am a science fiction writer, and I wrote the science fiction piece for this book. And I'm hopefully soon to be short fiction published science fiction person. But I've written a couple of essays for Beacon and also for Salam Love. So we're going to do a reading. We're going to do 15 minutes a piece. If you want to go shorter, that's fine, but 15 minutes is the ceiling. And we're going to have a little Q&A at the end. So, Laurie, would you like to start?
Sure, I'll go first. So I'm going to read a different chapter than I did last time. Last time I read the opening chapter. So just to position this a bit, it's Rat City is an alternative history. So it's set in an abolition city in a world in which the Zanj rebellion was actually successful, and cities are sort of on their own to create their own worlds without armies and police. So in the city of Aman Kala, they have private detectives who handle cases. And so my book is focusing on Mac, Daria Mac, who is one of these private detectives. She hangs out at a local saloon run by a jinn named Wada, and lots is happening by the time this starts. This is a bit different from my other works as it's noir, so it's not particularly, doesn't have, there's no redemption arcs in noir. And I also allow myself to get a little bit more nasty than I do in my usual books, which typically I try to keep fairly clean to invite all audiences to read it, but not this one. Okay, this is chapter 4. A strong tang of vinegar hit her as she walked through the swinging doors at the water wheel. Mac stopped short. Old Farhang was bent over, washing the floors with a large rag in his hands, sweeping the cloth back and forth and into the bucket to rinse. The old Persian stood up, hand on his back. You can always walk on my wet floors. He called out behind him, Lady Wada, Detective Mac is here. Wada appeared from the card room. She had cast off her luxurious red robe and wore a simple gown of thick wool, its narrow sleeves rolled up, a faded wrap tied around her waist. La Bassania, Daria? To Farhang, she said, we need another jug of vinegar back here. Labas, Mac replied perfunctorily as she walked behind the bar and pulled out a bottle of grappa. One eyebrow raised, Wada said, to your health. I owe you. Mac poured herself a glass and sipped it, the dregs wine burning away fear and old hurts on its way down. She topped off the glass and took it, her turban in the other hand, to a spot on the kilim-covered couch nearest the cold hearth. Wada ignored her and pushed a few black curls off her purple forehead. I don't see why I'm bothering to get the blood up. It adds character to the place. Perhaps I should hire a storyteller to grace the customers with a tragic tale of the stabbing. Use natron first, before the vinegar. Wada sunk down onto the low couch next to her. Didn't have time to dress this morning? Mac thumped her turban back on and buttoned her coat. Anahita told me to hurry. Where's my witness? Still upstairs, but the other one is here too, in the games room. That dimple of hers. Which one? Jabal ibn Abi Faria. He have something new to say? Perhaps we all have something new to say. Here it comes, thought Mac. The killer has green eyes. Mac turned her hand up in questioning frustration. Did you forget that when you could have told me earlier? I dreamt it last night. Mac sat up and stared. It came to me once I relaxed, Daria. Anything else? His eyelashes were long. He used kohl. Anahita teased as she descended the stairs. Wada, what kind of dream is this? I'll never tell. Wada's eyes were intense with desire. The sun was barely up, and Mac had had enough. Jebel emerged from the games room and stood in the wide archway watching them. Most looked worse in the light of day, but not this one. Grizzled beard and all the marks of age, he was still brutishly handsome. A long nose, flattened and off-kilter from being broken too many times, set off the plain intelligence of his face and sharp eyes. Those eyes. Rich, brown, and cold under a midnight blue turban flecked with green. Bah, bah, she thought with pleasure. But there was something else there, a vulnerability, as if she could see the boy in the man. A charmer, this one. But she did not mind that he stirred her old body. Then Mac huffed, realizing it was his cold eyes that had sparked Wada's memory, and she went cold at the thought of them together. Wada touched Mac's face to bring her attention back, and she flinched, wanting to slap her hand away. The djinn smirked. Oh, and the killer wanted to drink sharbat. Not alcohol? Who got the sharbat? Sal. Where did Sal go? What does that matter? She took another long drink of the grappa, this time out of plain irritation, and coughed again. Still no rum. My apologies. Sal came over as if called. Mac pulled her empty flask from her bag and set it on the table. Sal took it to fill. Mac stopped them. Where did you get the sharbat last night? Ben Yaqub. Why not Humayun's? It's closer. Better sharbat. Did he ask for Ben Yaqub? No, a sharbat Ben Yaqub made for him. The killer had been there before, and Ben Yaqub could answer some questions. Jebel moved out of the doorway to sit on a couch across from them. He spread his legs and threw one arm over the back of a high cushion. Mac was stuck between wanting to punch him and put her hand up his thigh. Wada followed Mac's gaze and sighed with pleasure. Tell me about the two regulars, Mac deflected. Room rose. He wants to talk to you. The third will have to come to you. Holding back made no sense. It was just more djinn mischief. You called me for this job. Wada mocked her with an innocent face. I'm done then. She pushed herself up off the low couch with a grunt. Tribunal will send somebody by. She patted her bag with the letter inside. I haven't informed them yet, so there's no trouble. Sal returned with her filled flask. Wada gave an exasperated moan. Ugh, Daria, you are so tiresome. Jebel stood, and Mac watched as he walked towards them, his eyes on her. His body was powerful and fluid, the movements of a man who loved to fight and more. She did not look away. I'll be coming with you, he said in that strange accent she could not place. Didn't you hear? I quit the case. He turned away to smile at Wada like he wanted to lean down and take a bite out of her. You two, stop playing. Fine. Wada touched her finger to her lips, then stood with them. I'll be good, Daria. Go up and see your witness. She gave Jabla a lascivious glance. I'll hold this one captive for you until you get back. I'm going with her to question the witness, my dear. His eyes were on Mac as he said it. Again, there was that touch of vulnerability in his gaze, making her want to bring him along and see what he had in mind for her. But that was not why she would ask him upstairs. She wanted to watch what he would do, find out why he wanted to come at all. They climbed the stairs side by side. but he made her feel as if he were following her lead. Of all the men she had betted in her life, none had tried that angle, and she admitted she liked it. Without knocking, Mac opened the door, painted with a single rosebud. Mubarak ibn Abdurrazak was sitting on the edge of the bed naked, his legs spread and flushed like a milk-drunk baby. Muna was pulling on a robe. Done with him. So you have a taste for Salat, remarked Mac. Is it the shape-shifting or the cruelty? How is that your business? Mubarak eyed Muna hungrily as she walked past him without so much as a glance. She slipped between Mac and Jubble on her way out and whispered, Cruelty. Jubble chuckled. Mubarak dressed, pulling on his underclothes, pants, tunic, a short vest, and then his long quilted coat. Made of fine wool, it had no embellishment. It was the clothing of a rich man who imagined he blended in with the poor. Better now that it was spattered with blood. Fine costume, commented Jabal. Mac let him talk. Your sleeves are neither practically narrow nor luxuriously wide, he continued. The hem hits mid-calf, a minor concession to the clothes of the poor who have no use for wide sleeves and robes that drag on the ground, getting filthy and in the way of work. Yet you err. The poor are as keen on embellishment as the wealthy. Mubarak replied wearily, Oh, you've caught me. The woman did better wearing an ostler's clothes, Jebel remarked to Mac. Jebel's attempts to impress her were clumsy, not what she expected. Ignoring him, she addressed Mubarak. Wada said you wanted to talk. Dressed, Mubarak stood before her, wide-legged, but it only made him look like he was about to take a shit. I'm not married, nor is my brother unaware of my nights out. If you want to threaten me with exposure, on that point you are going nowhere. Mac laughed out loud. You want threats to talk? She gestured to the open door. Should I call Muna back to get the information out of you? Because I assure you this is not my kink. Mubarak's lips quivered at the mention of Muna and gave up the act. The man started the fight. When he challenged Joe for cheating, she made it clear she was a sacred keeper, told him to fold and go or keep giving her his money. He put a shank on the table, demanding his money back. Did Joe take it seriously? Mac asked. We all took it seriously. He gestured to Jebel to back him up. The man was calm, terrifying. An angry man is dangerous, a calm man even more so. Go on, Jebel said. The rest of us stood to leave. Hajj Marwa, he added derisively, our resident mosque scholar in disguise as a stable hand, stood first and we followed her. Joe apologized and pushed all the money at the man. It was then he picked up the shank and stabbed her in the neck. And where were you all? Backing away across the room. He touched his coat. Still, I'm covered in blood. Don't let your servants wash it out. He nodded as if it were sincere advice. Why didn't you tell me this last night? He could have been outside waiting for us. We were all afraid. He looked expectantly at Jebel again. I, too, was afraid, Jebel conceded. She very much doubted that and turned back to Mubarak. So you slept here where he could find you. My chances were better here than in the road. I came back after you left and joined Muna for the night. Then he looked at her as if he had a sweetmeat to share, pausing long enough for her to grunt at him to get on with it. Sometimes Joe came in with a man who was not her husband. This was something. Know who he is? She called him her Alp. Turk, old, young, what? Her match, but he was big enough to make a woman like that seem small in comparison. Bowed legs like a horseman, sparse gray beard with a drooping mustache. He would sit on the bench and watch her play without saying a word. When she won again, she would say, My Alp, my love, look. Afterwards, she would hand him the money. How often did he come? Often enough, he was taking home the bulk of her winnings. Maybe he just carried it for her? Mubarak shook his head. One night when he did not come, she complained her Alp was bleeding her dry, but could not give him up. Said her husband complained about the money he thought she was losing at gambling. But he wasn't here last night. He didn't always come. He clapped his hands once. Now I've told you everything. Go to the Treaty Mosque and ask for Hajja Marwa, your third witness. She will confirm what I've said. Mac's eyes widened. Marwa is her real name? Yes. And yours is real too? Of course. Mac rolled her eyes. Well, at least I know where to find you. Wherever Muna goes, you will follow. Before they left, she insultingly thumbed toward Jabal. And how often has this one gambled with you? Last night was the first time. Jebel pursed his lips. She waved Jebel and Mubarak off and left them for Wada downstairs. Got what you need? Wada asked as Mac circled around to the bar. Did the keeper have a lover? Alp, old Turk, came with her often. Costly man. How come he wasn't with her last night? I don't know him well enough to know, Daria. Mac turned around and leaned on the bar with her elbows behind her and watched Mubarak walk down the stairs and leave without a care. Jebel took a stool beside her. Wada was unhappy about it. You did good in there, Jebel, Mac said, glancing at Wada, hoping to prick the jinn's jealous nature. Want to work this case with me? I thought you would never ask. He gave her one of his smiles. Wada tried to stand between them like some poor girl who's pinned her hopes on a man for the first time. Mac would have told her not to worry. Jebel wanted something other than the chance to jump on the dried-up belly of an old woman, and she was going to find out. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. That was fantastic. But we will move on to Jabril. Once again, I want to remind people that we will be having a Q&A at the end. Also, we do have a bit of a latency between the studio and YouTube, so feel free to start posing your questions in the comments now if you'd like. Jabril.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to do the opposite of what Laurie did. The past few times I've read my second chapter, which is a little more action oriented, but today I'm going to go ahead and start from the beginning. Mine is set in the historical United States, so there's not a lot of world building that needs to be done. And each chapter starts with place and time, so I'll just go ahead and start and launch into it. So chapter 1, Santa Catalina, Texas, 1893. Santa Catalina was a typical South Texas town, mostly adobe and clapboard, with a few brick storefronts in the business district. Main Street had been macadamized in '88, but the rest of the streets were still dust or mud during the rainy season, and electricity was nothing more than a rumor blowing down from San Antonio. The people were mostly Mexicans, always had been since before the Texan Revolution. They were hardworking people, farmers, shopkeepers, artisans, laborers, as were most of the few Anglo-Saxons in town. But as was the case in every border town from Brownsville to Tijuana, Santa Catalina was known to attract that class of men who made their living on the fringes of civilized society, trusting in their ability to light out across the Rio Grande under cover of night if things went south. It had its share of gamblers and conmen, pimps and painted ladies, common thieves, and road agents. Eddie Dawson was one of the latter. He was a young man still, no more than 21, but he'd been stealing chickens since he was 10 and sticking up stagecoaches at 16. He wasn't a bad kid, but life was hard for an orphan in the East Texas swamps he'd grown up in, and once he started robbing, he knew he had a knack for it. He made a decent living at it, and he'd never been shot nor seen the inside of a jail cell. Eddie didn't think much about God, but he figured someone must be looking out for him. That was before, though. Now Eddie was a new man. He had three things he'd never had before: a job, a home address, and a girl. True, Don Rigoberto barely paid him 4 bits a day to chop wood and clean up, but it was enough to cover his meals and rent a room at Doña Gertrudis' boarding house, which he supposed wasn't much of a home address either. But the girl, she was his everything. Mariana Hernandez ran the sewing machine in her father's haberdashery on Main Street. She was said to be of old Spanish stock, her family come over with Cortez or Coronado to hear Don Pedro tell it, and Eddie supposed he could see a certain aristocratic line to her face. She had raven black hair and olive green eyes, and when she smiled at Eddie, his heart melted. He'd met her by chance when he stopped in to buy a new suit, with his share of the loot from a Wells Fargo van up in Tom Green County. He was planning to hit the Double Eagle Saloon while he was in town, and couldn't very well go in his trail clothes. Mariana had been busy sewing a serge coat and hadn't even looked up at Eddie, who was just standing there in the doorway, watching her nimble hands guide the fabric under the presser foot at precisely the right angle, while her foot worked the pedal with a rhythmic whir. When she did look up, Eddie forgot all about saloon girls. Then Don Pedro had come out to take his measurements, and Eddie had barely exchanged 2 words with Mariana, but he found excuses to visit the haberdashery every day that week. First, he had to pick out some shirts, then the suit itself, then it needed hemming, and then letting out. Eddie was a handsome kid, or so the saloon girls always said, and he had a certain natural charm. Soon he and Mariana were chatting for 15 minutes every time he entered the shop. Don Pedro was not blind. If you want to court my daughter, he said to Eddie, who would come in to have some buttons replaced not 5 days after buying the suit, I have 3 conditions. You must be a Catholic, you must have a steady job, and you must not go whoring about town. Thinking of his family back east, Eddie vaguely remembered half of them were Cajuns, so he figured he was Catholic enough, though he hadn't been to church in a year of Sundays. After first meeting Mariana, he'd never made it to the Double Eagle, and he figured it would be easy enough to keep it that way. And a healthy young man could always find work, or so he'd heard, so he hired out to Don Rigoberto. Then he cleaned himself up, put on his new suit, and presented himself at Don Pedro's doorstep as a fully qualified suitor. That was 3 months ago, and Eddie remembered every day of those 3 months with fondness. But then Don Pedro had fallen ill, and the German doctor said it didn't look good at all. The old man, who Eddie had come to be pretty fond of, considering he'd never known his own pa, spent all day in bed, coughing and wheezing like a lifelong smoker, though he'd never had so much as a cigarette. Now, instead of meeting at the ice cream parlor or watching the Catalina Caymans play some other South Texas team at the new ballpark, Eddie and Mariana spent every moment of their leisure by Don Pedro's bedside, changing the cold compresses on his forehead and wiping the bloody spittle from his lips. Don Pedro couldn't work, of course, so Eddie offered to quit Don Rigoberto's to come help out at the shop. But he didn't know anything about tailoring, and they both knew it. Better your $3 every Saturday than you ruin my inventory trying to learn to sew at your age, Don Pedro told him. I'll be back in the shop soon enough, and then Mariana can take care of things. And until then, Mariana can take care of things. The former was blatantly untrue. Don Pedro could barely get out of bed, much less measure, cut, or stitch, and wasn't getting any better. The latter was true as far as it went. Mariana sat at her sewing machine until late at night, until the whirring of its mechanism even featured in her dreams. She took in mending, too, but this was cheap work and hardly made up for the lost tailoring business. When Bob Dixon's menswear and leather goods opened up at the other end of town, that was it for Hernandez's. If anyone came into the shop at all, it was more likely a creditor than a customer. Don Pedro authorized Eddie and Mariana to sell off the inventory at cut rate prices just to pay his bills, but it was too little too late. Eddie came to visit Mariana one spring morning to find her crying over a letter from the Rio Grande Valley Real Estate Bank. If all arrears were not paid within 30 days, the bank would repossess the shop, to include the upstairs apartment she shared with her father. Can we talk downstairs? She asked Eddie when she had regained her composure. Of course, my love. Eddie, she said, I'm sorry. For what, Mariana? I love you, Eddie, I do. You're a good man, and you've been so kind to my poor father. But his heart dropped. Of course there was a but. Eddie, she said, barely holding back her tears. I can't marry you. My father's sending me to live with my aunt in Nuevo Leon. She has a little farm, a few goats and chickens, and things are looking up in Mexico these days. She's all the family I have left. Now it was Eddie's turn to say, but nothing, Eddie. How can I refuse my father's dying wish? Eddie should have seen it coming. He couldn't even be mad at the old man. It was his own fault, wasting his time working for Don Rigoberto for pennies a day. Months of labor with nothing to show for it. He bowed his head and made to leave. But a thought was forming somewhere in the recesses of Eddie's mind, whispering its way to the forefront. He was only on the straight and narrow, working that rubbish job to fulfill Don Pedro's conditions, wasn't he? If those conditions had changed, Eddie knew how to get money. He turned back to the weeping girl. Mariana, he said, his mouth working faster than his brain. I got a way to pay off the bank. Just don't let your old man send you away. What do you have in mind? She asked, probably suspicious of Eddie's sudden confidence. I know you have a past, Eddie. I never judged you for it. But don't go down that road again. Not even for me. It's not worth it. My family has some land back east, Eddie lied. My cousin Pierre always wanted it to expand his spread, but my pa made me promise not to sell it too cheap. If I offer him a good enough price, he'll buy it. Worthless swamp though it is. I'm sure I can pull in 1,000. Mariana's eyes, almost dry now, betrayed incredulity, but she didn't voice it. Whatever you're going to do it quick. Time is short. I will. Bendición. Dios te bendiga. Eddie kissed Mariana goodbye, a sweeter, sadder kiss than they'd ever shared before. Then he headed out into the night, his feet tracing a path he'd resisted for months. Within minutes, he'd reached the Double Eagle Saloon. Evening, boys, ladies. He tipped his hat. Anyone seen Frank Danger lately? And that is end of chapter 1. Next, we meet Frank Danger and see what trouble they get into together.
Thank you, Jabril. So I guess it's down to me, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading that story. By the way, Jabril. So I'm a big Western weirdo. So I am J. Austin Yoshino. I am the author of the third story in the novel, in the collection of stories, Revenge in 3, entitled Spatial Condition. It is a science fiction story. It takes place in the distant future. Human beings are spacefaring. They are mining the outer space, and there are essentially 8 major oligarchy families called the admin nobles that essentially run their portion of mining, and that's kind of the social world that this whole thing is set in. So I basically didn't do anything like Jabril or Lori. I am reading completely different part of the story, and I think if you look hard enough and go back and cobble enough of these readings together, you will probably be able to hear the whole story without paying for it. So okay. One evening, Mosen was working out. He had learned to mark the passage of time by the number of exercises and repetitions he completed. Usually by the time he finished, Abbas would have appeared at the hole in the floor to ask him if he was ready for dinner. But this night, Abbas was still sitting on his mattress, surrounded by scraps of paper and cloth covered in scrawls. "What's all this?" Mosen asked. Abbas, surprised, jerked upright and hurriedly collected all the scraps and tossed them under his blanket. "A little project I've been working on." Mosen was genuinely hurt by Abbas's secrecy. "We've been in this place for years, and I still don't know anything about you." Abbas's shoulders sagged, and he nodded slightly. "You're right. We've shared food, prayers, conversation. You've even shared your tragic plight with me. I keep telling myself I'm not ready, but what does that mean in this place? I'm sorry, my friend, for holding out on you. It's unlikely that we will escape this prison, in which case the details of your life will die with me." Abbas stood up and headed for the hole in the floor. "I'll make us some food. A tale is best told over a meal." Soon after, he emerged from the outer hall, holding a couple of steaming bowls and utensils. He handed one to Mosen, sat down cross-legged across from him, and took a couple of bites from his food before he spoke. "I grew up on the streets of Detroit, living in the shadow of massive automated skyscrapers that churned out tug chassis and FTL drive parts. It was a boon for those already endowed with wealth. The same people who had possessed capital in previous eras were the ones profiting from it then. The only other path to some level of comfort, beyond what basic assistance could provide, was vice, and I had no stomach for that. My parents were Muslim, but that was not my problem since I wasn't particularly observant myself. I just didn't like the prospect of having to exploit or harm others so I could have more." "There was no shortage of vice," Abbas began thoughtfully. "Almost everyone was on basic assistance, and the vice trade was simply a means of expropriating that money from the people. Food and housing were provided by the bureaucratic remnants of the United States as recompense to the people for having left them behind on Earth while the wealthiest traveled the stars and got rich doing it. And its only function was to be able to buy enough booze, drugs, or sex to anesthetize oneself against the reality of having no purpose. It wasn't enough to buy equipment, start a business, or lease a shop. Not that there were any shop fronts to lease. All of them were occupied by squatter businesses like restaurants and brothels. left by disinterested landlords too busy making profit from off-world booms. The other thing there was plenty of were massive hollowboard displays with rotating advertisements. Frequently, the boards would display a man with immaculately brushed blonde hair and white teeth, smiling and talking about off-world opportunities. Corporations were looking for loaders, pilots, engineer positions for off-world colonies and outposts. Aptitude battery scores would determine occupational specialties and postings. When I discussed the possibility with my friends, they laughed at me. So I stopped talking. But my mother encouraged me. She wanted more for me than an aimless existence in the bottom of a bottle. I went down to the recruitment center and took the batteries. I was aiming for engineer or tug pilot and figured those jobs would be most likely to land me on a colony eventually. The idea of helping to build something from nothing with a group of newly invigorated and committed people was really appealing. But no matter how hard I tried, I never qualified for those jobs. The only positions I ever qualified for were loader or combat arms. Looking back on it, my friends were right to mock me. I aced those exams. I know I did. Recruitment was a sham, designed to lure people like me in, disposable people they could herd into specific fields. The creation of FTL technology didn't just fuel enterprise, it fueled criminality. The type that was sanctioned and shielded by corporations and unenforceable laws. Claim jumps were as common as new claims. Illegal mining and piracy were also common. Corporations needed cheap ways to secure bottom lines. Weapons were cheap. Bodies were even cheaper, especially if they stopped breathing. And that's what I was herded into. Massive corporate armies were formed faster than any legal body on Earth could regulate them. They barely managed to prohibit the landing of these armies on Earth. I spent the next 10 years landing on a half dozen planets and countless asteroids to secure or take mining rights by force. Sometimes the landings devolved into protracted campaigns that lasted a year or more. Me and my comrades were a little more than broadcast entertainment for the masses on Earth, laying in front of hollows and drinking. I marked the years in bodies, but those I worked for at home measured those bodies in stock prices. During my last assignment on planet, with freezing methane snow, I decided I needed to find a way out. I tried to test out of the corporate armies, but that proved to be as much a sham as it was the first time around. Recruiters had quotas, and attrition through transfer was simply not an option, at least not formally. After a several months stretch and another mindless slog, waist deep in mud, I returned to the rear for bunk time and showers. I was informed that a communique was waiting for me. A woman on Earth had taken interest in me. Apparently, surviving multiple campaigns over a decade and across several systems was a rare achievement. I never noticed that most of the people I shipped out with never survived the campaigns. Everyone was named Steve or Joe or Paul. Everyone died. And there was always someone with one of those names to replace them. Or maybe I just called them those names without ever caring if they were right. Realizing he was becoming sidetracked, Abbas waved his hand before continuing. So this woman on Earth worked for a company that owned my contract. So she got on her work terminal and did a search for badass, and the computer spit out my name. In those days, corporations, authoritarian regimes, and international criminal syndicates had become indistinguishable from one another. Without the legal pretense of human rights, these entities were free to dispense with its trappings. They were brutal, violent, and efficient, and their brutality was not reserved for the most vulnerable. In the race to dominate the stars, entire families would burn in the fires of greed and industry. My new employer understood this. She had lost her husband during an attempt on her life by a professional rival. She was determined not to lose herself or her children to the same fate. Yes, I've heard the stories, Mosen interjected. The TUC was founded in part to foster cooperation in space commerce and reduce the violence. Within weeks, I was back on Earth, but in a much better situation. Instead of the crowded and dark streets of Detroit, I found myself living in a gated compound in Virginia. In the morning, I escorted my employer to work in an armored limousine, accompanying her into her building and under an armored awning. Then returning to the car in the house. I repeated this again in the evening and often late. In between drop off and pickup, I spent a good part of the day with her children. They had many instructors, and sometimes, if the subject interested me, I would sit in on the classes and participate. The kids enjoyed this and grew to like me a great deal as a result. I made use of the hours in between lessons, and in the evenings, the Suleiman family had access to libraries from all over the world, hollow tutors, and news feeds. When I wasn't being a chauffeur and a bodyguard, I was learning. It wasn't just for my own enrichment, though. I enjoyed that aspect of it most. I felt it was important to give myself something I never had before: options. Families were constantly ascending and being destroyed in the newly formed order, and I realized there was work to be had in this line. Despite that I had spent most of my adult life up to that point as a soldier, there were aspects of being a bodyguard that you didn't learn in an army. Bodyguards like to carry vibro weapons in case they needed to fight somewhere. Firearms would do more harm than good. Mercs like me had never cared about collateral damage, so even as a hardened veteran, I had only the truest knowledge of their use. The children had private weapons instructor, and those were among the lessons I sat in on. On the days when there was no martial instruction, I sparred with them to make sure they understood the application of the techniques they learned. I became a formidable fighter and made sure the children were even better. Once the children went off to university, it was just me and Miss Suleiman. I continued with my usual routine, but my days were my own and I spent them much as I had previously, even finding time to take up a hobby or two. The children came home for holidays, including Ramadan, but they had little need for me. They still had need of protection, but with them at different schools and Miss Suleiman at home, she found alternate arrangements. I was treated more as a revered uncle or family friend than a bodyguard. Sometimes they would seek my advice in personal matters. Miss Suleiman treated me as a friend despite the professional nature of our relationship. I was also privy to the most intimate details of her life. I had to be aware of her whereabouts at all hours and who she was with. It was not uncommon for her to discreetly take lovers. I pored over their lives in great detail. Most importantly, I became intimately familiar with her friends and rivals. If I was going to keep her alive, this was essential. One evening, Miss Suleiman called me to her office to ask for my expertise. To my surprise, it was something from my previous life regarding astronavigation. Though I was never a navigator during my time in space, she believed my practical experience with asteroids might be useful. She shared with me the details of an undiscovered mining prospect, a resource-rich asteroid orbiting a red giant called Adara. A difficult yet potentially rewarding prospect, but she was also concerned about the security implications. It was becoming harder and harder to find unclaimed prospects, and many people had taken to stealing information. She was concerned that one of her rivals might try to kill her for what she knew. I assured her that I would keep her and her secret safe. I even memorized the orbital vectors, gravitational constants, and coordinates to this new prospect, and in my spare time made calculations on how best to approach it. The asteroid was too close to the red giant to mine safely, but the gravity of Adara was too intense to simply tow the asteroid away. Whoever figured out a way around those particular challenges would become one of the richest people in the galaxy. Judging by all the scans they had collected, this fact, I could tell, made her nervous. The next several weeks were very tense and kept me on edge. I'd never seen Miss Suleiman so agitated. At times, she seemed scared. She was often on calls to the children, admonishing them about their security, and made fewer appearances in public herself. It was obvious that this had to do with Adara. There had been previous prospects, many planetoids, even incursions into rival companies' territories. None of those had rattled her the way this one had. The tension subsided a bit when the children came home in spring for Ramadan. Well, even I relaxed a bit. Having them all under the same roof made it easier to look after them. Miss Suleiman was in the festive mood, so she and the children invited me to participate in their Eid dinner. The children entertained us with tales of their college exploits, and we laughed and talked. For the first time, I felt like part of a family, even compared to my own. It's funny how euphoric the absence of poverty can be, but euphoria has its own price. In my time working for Miss Suleiman, I saw every manner of savagery enacted and between families, corporate executives, and criminal syndicates. But nothing could have prepared me for the lengths that someone would go that night in order to get at her closely guarded secret. I had seen this before, but had never been on the direct receiving end. When I was a soldier, it was common for the various fleets to deploy chemical lasers to soften enemy positions before landing units on an asteroid or planet. This was not an asteroid, but there was no doubt in my mind we were under attack. The weapon used was deceptively uncalamitous. The house didn't shake. There was no bright light or explosion. From my seat at the table, I could see down a nearby hallway into a foyer. The door, rails, and windows simply dematerialized, and that dematerialization was moving in a progressively narrowing beam toward us. What was it? Was it an orbital laser? Mosen sat up, leaned toward Abbas as he continued the tale. There was a crackling sound, likely one of the support beams of the house disintegrating and causing part of the structure to collapse. That was Miss Suleiman's first hint that something was wrong. I jumped into action and grabbed one of the children by the arm. Miss Suleiman grabbed the other. I pointed toward a pantry and yelled, though I had no expectation they would be safe in there. Turning the table over, I was almost carrying one of them. I was almost carrying one of them and pushing the others as hard as I could, shoving them into the pantry. I didn't make it. I didn't make it in because the floor collapsed beneath me. Abbas paused for a moment and looked down, then shook his head as if fighting off the flood of images from that moment, or thinking of something he could have done differently. The first time I awoke, I was being dragged by my arms by two people. I couldn't raise my head, and my entire body felt like it had been broken. I could only see the immaculately manicured lawn scrolling through my narrow view, and small plastic rivets in the armored boots of men who were carrying me. The next time I came to, I was in the back of an armored vehicle of some kind. It had small, thick plexiglass portholes through which I could see the hill where the house used to be situated. Now there was only a tidy blackened crater. Even the trees and grass surrounding the structure remained untouched, chemical lasers invisible to the human eye, virtually silent and pinpoint accurate. They were designed to destroy enemy fortifications, but this was no bunker. It had been a home with a family inside. Thank you. And that ends my segment of the reading. You all are on mute. You can unmute yourselves.
That was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of your novella.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I love Abbas.
When I went back and I was like reading it, I was like, what part am I gonna read? And I was like, you know what, this part is great. I'm gonna read this. So it is a little bit one note because it's him narrating, but I enjoyed it.
No, the narration is really vibrant. It's really vibrant, and that's so hard too as a writer to write somebody just telling their story with and you really bring all that action to life. It's really, really good. And all the nerdy aspects are just perfect. They're perfectly there. They're really cinematic. I loved it.
Thank you. I got a real education writing this novel. I got a real education from both of you writing this novella, I gotta say. So
I think we all learned a lot from each other. I mean, this is what I wrote was new for me. I think I don't know about Jibril, but I learned a lot about writing action scenes from Jibril. So this was I think we all did a lot.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes,
I remember at the beginning we were trying to kind of match the novellas beat for beat, which I think we ended up kind of going different ways. But in order to do that, I wrote a very tight outline, which has really helped me in my writing process on other things because I wasn't much of an outliner before. I was more of a discovery writer, and this one really helped me to plan a little better uh, and work, a little more methodically.
same.
Oh, I'm jealous. I'm jealous about the outlines. I can't figure out how to do it.
I don't outline. I do kind of. I did pants this one a bit, like the first draft, and I also realized because Karen came back and she was like, "There's too much exposition," right? And so I had to like chop these huge sections, which was appropriate because I didn't
Karen was our story editor, so
yes,
yeah,
and which was appropriate because you didn't want to. I didn't want to get this one note narration to the whole thing. Like there had to be some dialogue. There had to be other ways of fleshing, showing, not telling, etc.
Yeah, it was really good.
I'm
really,
also
really good.
I know there's a latency with YouTube, so I want to give people because we can kind of jaw for a few more minutes, but I want to give folks an opportunity to ask questions in the Q&A, which will appear in the. It may take a couple of minutes to appear in the feed, but if you have questions, feel free to ask. I think we have 3 people watching on YouTube, maybe 5. Oh, 7. Okay. Well, there's 7. So, just joined. This is Marjan93. Hello, Marjan. Would you like to ask a question? Please ask us a question. Yeah, we'll give her 20. Yeah. Revengeance.
She wants more.
Revengeance 7.
I would totally take. I mean, Count of Monte Cristo is so rich. I would completely take that as inspiration. Again, I mean, you could just do nothing but write rewrites of that story for the rest of your life, and never end up repeating yourself.
Yeah, I also think like if you look at the original book, right, there's like all these kind of side like side stories.
Yeah.
I mean, that book is really dense, you know. Like I literally took the Jim Caviezel, right? Like what's the other guy's name? The guy who I based Hassan on, the actor. I forget his name, but I love him
I
because
don't
he was
remember.
perfect. But he talked with that sort of tight jaw. Oh, Mosin, how are you? What are you doing here? You know, like I had this really specific image in my mind of who he was, but I had to follow that movie to kind of get like I went back and watched the movie like 3 times.
It ended up coming into my late in my thriller Disgrace that I read under a pen name, Jane Green. I ended
Brilliant.
up my one of my bad guys actually, like the Count of Monte Cristo is his favorite book. And his mom even, cross stitches him something about, about like, getting revenge is the best, is the best thing you can possibly do. And he talks about how when he got to the point where, why can't I remember his name? The main character, the Count of Monte Cristo.
Right.
When he, sorry,
Dantes,
getting old is no joke. Anyway, and
Dantes,
then
right.
Edmond
Dantes,
Dantes, yeah.
but you know that he ripped out the part about. So my character rips out the part about his redemption. And he says, now the book is whole again. Now the book is right. He should never have sought redemption for the revenge.
By the way, that was a brilliant book. Absolutely
Oh,
brilliant. I
thank
enjoyed
you.
Yeah.
it. Go
And
ahead.
it had so many twisted bad guys to go around. I'm not even sure. I don't remember which one you're talking about because
Yeah, I know,
they
right?
were each very
This is
bad
this
in
is
their
the
own
guy that
ways.
he so there's all this tech stuff in it, right? And so, Jason he was my tech guy. So everything in there was like approved by him. I would write it. So the tech guy is the guy who was the tech bro was the one. And so every single bit of I had somebody read it recently and say to me, "How did you do all that tech stuff?" And I said, "Well, I have the email of somebody you could reach out to if you want to do that, because it for sure was not me."
It was. I remember thinking too when reading it. It was like I think I made this comparison with you once. It was like the Star Chamber, that movie, The Star Chamber, but with like psilocybin, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It was like the Star Chamber if all the members of the Star Chamber got high on like shrooms.
It was definitely weird. But I was so grateful for this project too, for me to start something new, because the Sufi mysteries were so pious, that like I felt like I wanted the story allowed me to doing Count of Monte Cristo sort of allowed me to explore characters in a different way, and to sort of write about a dominatrix Jen, and all this kind of stuff, and this woman who's drinking all the time and having poppy at night because she can hear the rats screaming the walls, right? To write about stuff in a different way, to loosen me up a little bit as a writer. I think I felt really constrained by having to, like, I always want to write for our community, but that I felt like I was writing for a certain part of our community, rather than all of us, and rather than allowing myself to be a full member of our community, which is a person who thinks stories like that are actually really interesting and can be told. And I think the only thing that sort of really matters to me is that there always be redemption. But this book, I really wanted to try something where there wasn't any redemption.
I think
And so,
the alternate history of the Zand Rebellion being successful was awesome.
yeah, right? Wouldn't that have been a thing? Yeah,
Absolutely.
that
I
would have been
also
really
I
something.
also remember Jabril, didn't you I know that you wrote a story for Cosmic Horror Monthly. Was that not a like cosmic horror western?
It was. So I have a recurring character named Chema Valdez, who's uh, kind of based on. So in the 90s, I lived in Puerto Rico when the chupacabras got big, and there was a local mayor whose name was, I forget his actual name, maybe Jose, but his nickname was Chemo Soto. Um, and people called him Chemo Jones because he would go out in the boonies and chase after the chupacabras, like in Indiana Jones. So I kind of based the character on, well, it's kind of inspired by him, not based on him in any other way, but it is in. a generally kind of 19th century Western context, um, and I try to just have him solve a different kind of cosmic horror infused episode in each story, and they're all independent. They don't have to be written in any particular order. There's only two that are published right now, and I got a few more that I'm shopping around.
So exciting.
Yeah, I want to see, like, because I remember reading it probably like that's that one story you sent me like over a year ago, which I thought was really cool. I would like, 'cause I mean, because Western is one of those untapped like gold mines. Forgive the pun there, but it's one of these untapped gold mines of like potential cosmic horror. Like when I read that, I was like, oh my god, I want to write a Western cosmic horror so bad. But I don't know anything about Westerns other than spittoons and Navy Dragoon.
I think there are a bunch of them out there. It's honestly like the weird westerns aren't my most favorite subgenre. Um, but I thought it was something, I thought it was a fun character, and there's kind of a market for it in short fiction, which there's not much of a short fiction market for more straight up westerns. It's certainly not for Muslim westerns.
Someone has said, Marjan93 said, I heard Dumas had other writers. I'm interested in the collaborative aspects of storytelling and even fan fiction. What are areas in your novella where you would like readers to world build or spin off?
Well, I'd love somebody to take to take Daria and give her, a hot romantic novel, and I guess since there's gin in that world, it could also be romancy. So somebody could do a romancy spin-off of Daria, finally getting laid. That would be amazing.
That's okay. I would read that. What about you? What about you, Drabil? Do you have any thoughts on that? Where you would?
So I think one thing that I did that kind of stuck close to the original Count of Monte Cristo is that, at least in the version that I've read, I think I read the abridged version, not the full 3 volume version, honestly. Um, there's like at least a 10-year gap where, Edmond Dantes he disappears into the East and he comes back as the Count of Monte Cristo. And um, that leaves this big long space for him to have lots of adventures that would make for cool stories. And so my character of Eddie Dawson, he does the same thing. He goes to the Middle East around the time of World War I, and he has a bunch of adventures that just barely show up in his memories in the novella that would make for a great you know sequel or something if anybody wanted to do that.
Like a prequel origin, like a prequel story. That's actually a good one. I like that. Um, to answer the question, I started taking some notes after the very first reading we did when we first released on something that I'm calling Corsani, which is the Arabic word for corsairs. And because I thought it would be a good idea to write, and you know what, and if somebody wants to steal it, fine. But I thought it'd be a really cool idea to write a story about space anarchists who like steal. I mean, I know that that's kind of been done, but I think with like the Expanse and like the James S.A. Corey novels, they have like the OPA, which is kind of like that.
Yeah.
But I think more Islamic, right? And just these kind of Islamic space pirates who kind of drift through space and really sort of challenge the status quo by not being part of it, So
there's always room for more pirates.
For that. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I just said there's always room for more
Yeah,
pirates, and he said the
absolutely.
same thing. But he said he's the only one who really works with traditional publishing, so he says there's a market for it. So,
Well, I don't know about traditional publishing. I just think because Dune is so big over the past few years that giving it an Islamic slant would be more marketable than it might have been a few years back.
Yeah.
And especially I
Very
like the
cool.
idea of the Barbary Corsairs in space. I think that would be pretty cool.
Yes.
Totally.
Yeah. Well,
my dream was to write a Barbary Corsair epic, but I've never got around to doing that. So
hey, there's always time. There was not always time, but there's time currently. Like, we're not dead yet, so maybe like we'll strike it rich and we can just lay around writing all the time, indulging every idea that we have.
That's what retirement is for, guys.
Right. All right. Well, we are coming up on the hour. I appreciate you all. More pirates, please. Thank you, Marjon93. So thank you all. Thank you everyone who tuned in. Thank you, Jabril. Thank you, Lori. I think we may try to do this one more time if they're amenable to it before the end of the year. But thank you everyone who showed up, and thank you for your questions. And we'll see you possibly next time. Also, make sure you buy the book. Make sure you go to Amazon. It's available electronic format and normal print format. Make sure that you go to, this is important, you go to Goodreads or you go to Amazon and you leave a review. That is absolutely essential. If you want to support us, do that. So thank you, everyone, and I hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Always my pleasure.
Salams, everyone.
Salams.